Maybe I just grew up not really knowing how to say no and really find good boundaries. But as I got through my career and as I started working on myself in retirement, I started reading a lot about boundaries. I started thinking a lot about boundaries. I started trying to say no a little more. And I want to go through a couple of things with you that I learned about boundaries and about myself as I worked on my boundaries. Hey everybody, I'm back for Women and Wednesday, and today we're going to talk about an interesting topic that came out of a few of the comments that we got on YouTube, and it's about boundaries. And I'll be honest with you, I'm probably not the best person to talk about boundaries because it's been a work in progress for me. I don't know if it's just how you're born or raised or, what your circumstances are or where you are in the pecking order. I was the youngest and I was the girl, and, I remember my mom used to call my brother the egg, like, don't ask Michael to do anything. Jody, go do the dishes, go do this, go do that. And maybe I just grew up not really knowing how to say no and really find good boundaries. But as I got through my career and as I started working on myself in retirement, which I hope you are all doing, working on yourself in retirement, maybe you don't need to, but I really needed to. I started reading a lot about boundaries. I started thinking a lot about boundaries. I started trying to say no a little more. And I want to go through a couple of things with you that I learned about boundaries and about myself as I worked on my boundaries. So the first thing is I really needed to understand my needs first. And that was hard because I hadn't put myself first. As you guys may know, we have 6 kids, a really busy, loud, noisy, crazy family. I worked, Mark worked. It was, kind of always life in motion, right? So I never really took the time to think about what do I need first. I need to think about what drains me and what overwhelms me, and also what inspires me and gives me energy, and really clarify my values and then stick to them. So that was my first step in kind of starting this creation of and this idea around boundaries. I'm sorry, I have like a hair stuck on my face. The second thing I needed to do was communicate clearly and directly to primarily my family members on where my boundaries were because it was new to them. I needed to be sensitive that it was new to them, and it wasn't just like, hey mom, can you? Hey mom, will you? Hey mom, I need. Hey mom, I want this. Hey mom, I want that. Because when we come into retirement, all of a sudden everyone thinks our calendar is their calendar. Maybe you don't see that in your family, but my family kind of ran that way. My calendar became their calendar. I need you to be on this call. I need you to help me with this. And it never was, do you have time? Do you have a second? So I needed to communicate clearly what those boundaries were and how I was going to enforce them. The third thing that was important to me was consistency. As you know, if you've raised kids, if you've worked in corporate America, if you've led teams, if you've led nonprofits, if you've been on a community service team in any way, consistency is really important for people to then really understand where you're going and what you will and won't do. That was hard for me. We do have 6 kids and they're all at various different ages. And, I needed to make sure I was being consistent and fair to myself first and then to their needs. I probably struggled with that one for a good couple of months, being consistent and not going back to my old ways. The next thing was saying no without guilt. And I'll give you a really good, relevant situation that I just had. On Friday of this past week, friends of ours were coming down from up north, and they've got a little place down in Florida as well. We had scheduled to play golf. And my oldest daughter is getting married in June of 2026. And at the last minute, she had 2 Zoom calls that she wanted to put on my calendar for Friday, one with a florist and one with a videographer for her big day. And mind you, her big day is June 2026. And it was last minute for me, but she works this busy, crazy schedule. I mean, crazy, 60, 70 hours a week in corporate America. So I know she was fitting it into her calendar the best that she could. But I had already planned an afternoon with this couple that we haven't seen. And rare do you find a couple where you just love both of the people. And we were going to play golf. And I had to say no, Evan, I can't be on these 2 calls. And I had to say it without guilt. Now, I've said no before because I've practiced that, over the course of this boundary setting thing, but I really had to say it without guilt. And I did it on Friday. It was a big milestone for me. I said, I can't be on the call. Happy to call you later and figure out how it all went. And you know what? It went fine without me. The other thing you have to do is begin to recognize boundaries in others. So I'm working so hard on framing my boundaries, being clear, being consistent, really trying to stay on the healthy side of decisions for myself. But it's also important to recognize other people's boundaries. Recognize when Mark says, I can't do X, Y, or Z. I have a good example for that as well. Tonight we're going to go do a murder mystery dinner at our golf club. Mark has zero interest in a murder mystery dinner on a Sunday night. And I really wanted to do it. And I forged forward and I paid for our 2 seats and we're going with another couple. And I know he really doesn't want to do it. And one of his boundaries is Sunday night's pretty protected because it's kind of that Sunday scaries, getting ready for the whole next week and, the work that we have to do and the research that we have to get done and the appointments that we have. And I booked it anyway. So kind of failed on that one of really not recognizing other people's boundaries. But it is an important thing to do as you're starting to frame out and set yours. The next thing, this is kind of an interesting one. I really was fearful in setting my own boundaries. At nearly 60 years old, when I have retired and I worked and I raised kids and I'm proud of so many things, I was actually fearful in framing out the boundaries. And my fear really was based in what conflict it would cause. What conflict would it start with relationships that are important to me? What conflict would it start with relationships I'm trying to nurture that may be broken? What conflict would it start with new relationships that, I'm trying to, jump into as I'm building community? And I really have had to take a long time to acknowledge the fear in that conflict. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but it's a very unsettling feeling. One of the last things I'm working on still is setting emotional boundaries around the boundaries that I'm creating. So I want to try to not say no or yes to things that are so volatile, that create so much volatility in my moods or my swings or the pressures that I'm feeling, so that I can kind of contain with confidence, I guess is the best way that I can say it. Contain with confidence my emotions around whatever situation that is either trying to breach my boundary or ignoring my setting of boundaries, or really me not watching out for other people's boundaries, like the murder mystery night that we're going to tonight. I think that the biggest piece of advice I could give if you are coming off of your career, moving in through this transition, where you were always the yes person, where you were always the go-to person, acknowledge how that felt, because a lot of times in my world that felt good. It felt good for me to be the go-to person. It felt great for me to be the yes person, whether it was corporately, whether it was, the moms on the side of the soccer field, whether it was something for my children, certainly whether it was something for Mark, certainly if it was ever something for my pop or my mom, or anyone in Mark's family. I always wanted to be, it felt almost heroic to be the yes person. So I guess I would challenge you to make sure that that reward is worth whatever else you're sacrificing by not setting your boundaries. My sister-in-law does a fantastic job setting boundaries, and I admire it so much. My neighbor across the street does a fantastic job and has done so much work on herself setting boundaries in a way that's kind, clear, consistent, and makes her world better and more palatable and more doable and more joyful. And at the end of the day, I think we all want in this transitional time joy. And for me, that may not be in the superhero yes person anymore. That might not be the go-to person. I'll give you an example. Recently, I did dry January. You know, everyone jumps in and does dry January. And I have to say, I felt pretty good. So February 1st, we go out to dinner with friends. And, you know, I'm usually the first one, you know, sure, a glass of wine, sure. You know, I just really wasn't feeling it. And I betrayed myself. I had it because my neighbor across the street that I was doing dry January with said, woohoo, it's February, let's have that wine. I got home last night and I was so angry with myself because I really didn't want it. I really didn't need it. I had been feeling so good and personal health and wellness is so important to me, but I did it anyway. So perhaps like you, I still have a lot to learn when it comes to boundaries, but let's put it at the top of the list as to what we're all going to do to make sure our retirement's better. See you next Wednesday. That's Ruby.